your elder cares very deeply for you and what's happening to you. Sometimes we won't have the right resources available, maybe can't speak specifically to what you're experiencing, but it doesn't mean we don't care. Just encourage you to think of your elder in that context, and then to use them in that context as somebody who cares about what's happening, seek his counsel, and find out what kind of direction he can give or what kind of support he can give.
Welcome back to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Today, we're going to continue a conversation on the marriage decision-making process. In our last episode, Amber Miller and Ron Messner helped us understand what marriage by faith looks like. And today, we're going to continue that conversation. Thanks for being along. Okay, so as we think about having a proposal or proposing to a potential future spouse, I think we can quickly say, okay, this is going to be successful if it's a yes, and it's going to be unsuccessful if it's a no, right? I'd love to talk about success.
Absolutely. I think the only metric that we use is announcement and moving toward marriage. And so a lot of times people do assume that, hey, that equates success, when in reality it is more about what has God done through the process in my heart. Is he glorified in the process? That is ultimately the goal in any part of our life.
So, Amber, you've just cast and put a whole new spin on this, that the proposal process, the decision-making process, can end quite favorably with both a yes as well as a no. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of hard for us to compute.
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty with that is if the proposal is following a usual direction, and it is the brother bringing the request, he doesn't ask until his desire for marriage is pretty high. And when our brothers come and say, I can handle either way, I just feel like I need to know. I think they mean it, but in their mind, they're thinking of what marriage means. It's a very desirable state at that point. So I don't know how to help them with this concept. I believe it's true that a no can be successful or a yes can be successful. And frequently brothers will say, I prayed about it, I think I'll be okay either way. But they're not okay either way because it developed into a dream, an anticipation that became part of a reality, or else they wouldn't have brought it. They're not bringing a neutral request. They're not just wondering, do you feel the same way I do? They're wanting to move into something. And I think for a sister who hasn't yet moved into that vision, working through the process and coming to a yes means a success, or working to a no and finding contentment where she is or realizing it's not time can be a success. I think it's more difficult for the brother to find success in the no. Now, I think for sisters, it's hard in that they may have let someone down or they may be confused or they wonder why he did. So I'm not negating that piece. But the immediate intensity of a no is not success for brothers. Mm-hmm. So my question is how to help them get that piece. And I've heard lots of different explanations, and I think they sound so hollow because that brother doesn't feel that way. You can wrap it up in some kind of intellectual or biblical or spiritual statement about, God's just wanting to teach you his faithfulness or help you see through or providing some other direction. But internally he's feeling like, she said no and I'm still alone. Mm-hmm. That's what it feels like. That does not feel like success. Yeah. How to help. I feel lost with that.
What usually is your counsel, or what do you do with a brother and that's received a no?
I don't have a good answer. So I'll share a few things when I bring a no. I think probably I ought to meet with them. I don't always, so I'm just acknowledging that. I always say, let me know if you'd like to talk, and they never do. And I think, but they would and they wouldn't, because what are they going to say? What am I going to say? And I think they feel like whatever I have to say is going to be kind of hollow, short of saying just, oh, man, that stinks. That might ring true for them. But it's that connection or empathy that might be helpful. But as far as direction, in the immediate, what do you do when you go through a loss? You hurt for a time and you process and you have it down as the grieving part of that. But I don't find brothers overly willing to engage in that grieving process with someone. So I feel pretty inadequate there. I'd be open to some good ideas.
Mm-hmm. What you said, that it's very hard for brothers, but yet it's a no-win for sisters. Like it really is.
Mm. A no, or going through a...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure how to...
Well, one of the things, Amber, I would say, at least in observing or walking through something like that, is they're forced to go through this failure, which we're saying isn't a failure, but, however we want to, involuntarily.
Right.
And I think that's some of what I see, where A brother doesn't bring a proposal till he is ready to be married. So he doesn't expose himself to this process until he has some hope for what will be. She is forced into the process. Not to say yes, but into the process of considering marriage. Am I ready? Considering that person, considering what to say to. It's like, I didn't even ask for this. And now I've got to deal with the fact that I'm going to be awkward when I'm around him, or I don't know if his parents know, or I don't know if I'll get another proposal. Should have I been more open-minded? Or it was all involuntary. And nobody likes to be put in those. So I think that may not be the biggest element, but it's one of the elements I sense that I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah, there's no question that it can be a no-win for sisters, whether it is a no or whether it brings pain to that other person because of that, because they are forced into that decision-making process, because they are questioning themselves and, how did I attract this, so to speak? Is this how I'm perceived? I mean, just different questions like that start to formulate in a person's mind, which again, I think is why it's so important to have that counsel afterward to make sure that that's filtered through.
From your experience then, Amber, how do you work with an individual through that in terms of that follow-up? What would be some of the content of your conversations?
Coming to a place of peace about that and being willing to say, okay, what have I learned from this situation? I think that's always a place I want people to land, is just being able to look back and say, okay, God has been faithful through this process, not saying that it wasn't hard or hurtful, but God is faithful, and that there's certainly things that I have learned about myself through this process. And so how can I use those and move forward for the future?
And if we have secrecy, which we have for really important reasons now, with a no, right? Of course you would want some secrecy there just to protect people. But with that comes just the lack of people having any wherewithal on where a person is at and the support that they need, which is tough.
So it sounds like the one thing that we would promote, that collectively we would promote, is not unlike the beginning of the process, where we encourage seeking counsel before being ready for the proposal. See the value in counsel after also. Try to articulate or think through, what could be useful there, and to try to avoid that seclusion for men or for women, for different reasons, but to know that it could be helpful to talk through. Nobody's going to take the hurt away. That's not the point. I mean, nobody can do that when you go through other losses. But in other losses, we do process them. When someone dies, we process that. We have visitations, or people drop a card or stop over or things like that. If somebody's sick, if they lose a job, we have processes. We should at least encourage the people who go through the no, not the failure, but the no, that counsel could be helpful, not because it gives answers, but because it helps rebuild stamina.
I mean, you've already related it. Both of you have mentioned the loss. Really, that's what this is, a loss, and the loss cycle in terms of how you grieve and how you might have a range of emotions. But if I understand it right, at the end of it, is it a settled acceptance that perhaps the trajectory you're going towards, right? And from both of your experiences, can that be obtained? That an acceptance, a peace, a resolve can even lie at the end of a no or an unfortunate situation.
Absolutely.
I think that's incredibly hopeful, right? Whenever we go through loss and difficulty, just to know that there's a good spot on the other end. And I'm not there now, and I may not be there soon, but I will be there eventually. I think it's good.
Yeah. And two, it lessens the opportunity for Satan to come in and, again, question or raise doubts that need to be rested. And so, again, if you have someone that's speaking truth into you as you're processing that sense of rejection, or that sense of, I wanted this to move forward, I thought I was doing right, why does this still hurt so bad? Why do I not feel peace in this? It's a way that someone is speaking truth.
I had a brother that shared with me, kind of walked with him through the process, and he got a no, and we continued to talk. And shortly after that, we had a funeral on like a Tuesday, so we called off Wednesday church, right? And it was interesting. He texted me, or he shared with me, is like, the week I needed Wednesday night church. And I say that to say actually quite a bit hope, right? when we go to church and we get together, like that is what we all need at so many points in our life. We just need the fellowship. He didn't necessarily need somebody to know what he was going through. He just needed to sit and listen and worship. In that particular night, it didn't happen, right? When where perhaps too many of us were like, all right, free Wednesday night. I kind of like that. You know what I mean? And I think that it really impressed me to say a great deal of care, people care is happening in just doing life with people.
I could go to all the statistics in Washington. So that every proposal, the response to every proposal in all the marriages, and there are a significant number of no's. And the majority of those still exist down in the marriage column. And in a relationship that I know they wouldn't question, they are where they're supposed to be. So in terms of extending time, they would say that it worked out well. No, not all. I can't say that about all. It's not unusual for us to make decisions and have to rethink them, get no's to a job proposal or some other prospect. That's life. It is a part of life. And most people don't look back at what they didn't get and regret that. God is faithful in walking them forward in what they do get and finding joy in that and seeing it as what God wanted for them. In the moment, you can't take them there too quickly. But that is our goal, to get to that place of seeing that. It's not the end of anything. It's a part of the process of walking there.
And it's a step in their whole life, right? In their whole view of life. And yet it's so easy to tunnel vision into that and just feel like, I can't see outside of this hurt. I can't see outside of this unmet expectation. And that's hard when you stay stuck in that spot.
You get a person who's been hurt, and sometimes we do see them marry away some other place. And I'm wondering if you would have advice, or, would you want people to engage you? Does that make sense?
No, it's a fair question.
Is that a fair? Okay.
Yeah. I remember very distinctly early on as an elder having one of those situations. It wasn't about it being a second or a third time, but it was a little bit later in life in unusual circumstances, and one person a member of a church, the other not. And they're being open and sharing what was going on. And I was alarmed and frustrated and all the other things a young elder feels, old elders too, but at that point, and talking to one of my mentors, who was still an elder at the time, but quite a bit older than I was. And he said, Ron, be careful that you don't limit God or that you don't decide what God wants. And he actually encouraged me to enter into the process.
Okay.
And help them sort through that, which is incredibly helpful to me.
Yeah.
And it ended in marriage.
Yeah. So what I hear you say there is, if a brother or sister has a thought or desire or whatever, to not feel like, well, Ron's not interested in this, so I'm going to have to go rogue for this, but yet to bring you still, according to the former precepts of counsel, seeking God's will, to bring you into that discussion, and the elder brothers would welcome that type of discussion.
I think they would, Matt. I think our level of comfort will vary some based on how much it's occurred, how long we've been in eldership, and how much confidence we have in that person. There are people who are more careless in general about their walk of faith and those pieces, but I think they would engage in the discussion. And I would encourage people to do that, not as an endorsement. It's like, do it however you want to, and then we'll get involved in it.
Right.
But if something's happened that's different than the norm, it would still be helpful for us to talk together.
Yeah.
And there's clearly people who are married today, and people don't even know that they didn't go through a standard engagement in terms of how it happened. But it was an elder who engaged with them, and either somebody who wasn't from church or whatever the circumstances, and they did it carefully, they did it with counsel, they did it with good order, and it ended in a godly marriage.
Yeah.
But it is, if those circumstances are developing, if you feel strongly God's in that, we might not agree. Our counsel might be, this has to stop.
Yeah.
But we're not opposed to talking together and trying to provide counsel for that.
Yeah.
How do you offer hope to people who have been through this process multiple times?
I think the first thing, Amber, is that we're careful, not just in this podcast, but in general, not to imply that that's a frequent thing, that it's a real thing, but not that that's the norm. Because the way we deal with that, the way I'm going to suggest that we deal with that relates to that, but that it has to do with the imperfectness of life. There are people I know who spend 6 years developing a career, they're successful in school, they come up with the right degree, and their grades are all good, and they never use it. It never opens up. They happen to land in the marketplace during a recession, and for 2 or 3 years, nobody's hiring engineers or teachers or, whatever the profession is. And then when it does open up, they're stale, and they go to the new graduates, and so they end up being a different career than the one they prepared for, that's life. It has to do with the ebb and flow of life. And I don't know any other way to process it than that, to just say, I don't think we need to blame God for this. And we understand it's a very different place than what you anticipated. And we acknowledge that it can appear there's time wasted or contributions you wanted to make, which you didn't have an opportunity to do. I think that for sisters who really wanted to be a mother and other people and didn't get the opportunity to do that, but that it is the brokenness and uncertainty of life. How do you find the support to deal with that? Not what went wrong, but where do you look for support? And I think it's the same place you'd go if you lose your spouse young and you're a single parent, or through divorce and you're a single parent, or you become disabled, or you discover at age 35 that you have MS, or, all of those things. They're like, what am I supposed to do with this? And there's no answer. It's where do you go for support? And it is the process of life that it's sad, hard, broken, all those things. Job went through incredible pain, inaccurate thinking, to the edge of heresy.
Yeah.
I respect a lot where he went, but to the edge of it, before he was brought to the place of, my faith can't be based on promises or understanding. It has to be just based on God's existence only.
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing, Amber, is for them to hear that from a person who has, I do not like hearing consolation from somebody who didn't go through what I went through. And I'm not thinking that of any particular thing. It just rings hollow to hear that. But I don't think it changes the answer. There isn't an answer to that. I don't think. Is there? Our natural instinct is to go to, God didn't love me as much. Or I failed in pleasing God, or, things that are not theologically sound. That's where we just naturally go because we are flesh.
But as you even talk about those losses, those are all contained in the church.
Yes.
All of those losses are contained in the church, and I can only identify with a tiny sliver of them.
Yeah.
But I think there's something, again, powerful coming back to this earlier question of, what's the church have to do with this decision, right? But the church has very much to do with the cradling of it, pre, during, and post, because of Christ. I don't know. I think that's exciting.
There is nurturing here. And where else would that be? You can join clubs and communities and, all those kinds of things, but ultimately the church is where God is most able to nurture the hurting.
Yes.
So I think it speaks to that anywhere in the process.
Yeah.
The church isn't just a place to attend. That's where you can hear a sermon or it's the building, but the church body is a place to be nurtured.
The believers.
Yes.
There. Here as we close, I'd like to give you both an opportunity to just kind of share some parting thoughts. Amber, what would you have to share?
So there's a couple different things that come to mind. And one is just, again, I'd like to emphasize that success in the process does not equal engagement. And that this whole process and opportunity can really benefit and help a person grow, whether or not the process ends with a yes or a no. And then another thing, too, is if you are a mentor or you are a friend or an elder or whoever that's listening to this, check in with the people that you love and don't be afraid to ask those hard questions or to walk with them on the other side of a no. Or, again, that's our context today, but to be able to walk through them during those difficult times in their life, not letting Satan have opportunity to bring that self-doubt or question or blame. And that's very easy to take shape, but rather to help them work through that in a helpful way, in a way that honors God.
I appreciate that, Amber, because I feel like this conversation has elevated the need for that counsel and that care that others provide and surround a couple that's going through this. And so I think that's great advice. Ron, how about you?
So just a comment. I don't know what the tone of this will sound like on the listening end, but I want to be careful that we don't give an impression of this as a negative process or just having to deal with the difficulties related to it. The reason it may is because we're talking about what do you do with a no and how do we help support that. And the reason is because when it's a yes, you don't need as much support. It is still, by and large, a joyful process, whoever's involved in it. But we do want to be helpful on the other end, which is the reason for today. So I think the two things that said go back to encouraging people to think more about when we talk about a faith-based marriage, that that's not an outline of specific activities, that's a description of a mindset and of a biblical spiritual way to approach marriage. So to do that first and then think through the steps and how those steps work and what they are. And the other is probably each of us have a little different relationship with our elder, but I think I could speak for the elder body in saying that your elder cares very deeply for you and what's happening to you. Sometimes we won't have the right resources available, maybe can't speak specifically to what you're experiencing, but it doesn't mean we don't care. And it's not just because we're trying to get more married or less or anything like that. It's just caring deeply to what happens to you in a personal way, in an emotional kind of way. And just encourage you to think of your elder in that context, and then to use them in that context as somebody who cares about what's happening, and seek his counsel and find out what kind of direction he can give or what kind of support he can give.
I appreciate that. To our listeners, thanks a lot for being along. Thanks for being with us. Again, we have a number of resources on our website at accounseling.org regarding the marriage proposal process and things to be thinking about, maybe some help, some discussion aids. We would point you to those if they could be helpful. And we would also invite feedback, comments, questions. Feel free to email those at office@accounseling.org. Thanks.